I have awoken. This awakening has been a long time in the making, at least by mortal standards. For one such as me, a standard human lifespan of 100 years may pass by, without thought or regard, much as a day might pass by for you, and I am not even as old as that. Not in this particular incarnation, anyway. Dream, however, is older than most other things that exist. It is not as old as time or destiny, for that is by definition the beginning of existence, nor is it as old as life or death, for things had a chance to live and die before they had a chance to dream. But dream is not a name, it's a job description. And now, as I stand in Destiny's garden, contemplating the tome that he has given to me, I realize the true extent of my role and the responsibilities therein. It is a heavy tome, though perhaps lighter than one might expect, if they considered the unfathomable magnitude of the book's contents. A heavy burden indeed. What must I do? The question haunts me. I have awakened, yes. And so have others. And I had a hand in bringing this about. So too did many countless others. Will I be a just ruler, with the knowledge of what has come before? Shall I take this new clean slate that has been granted to me as an opportunity, to create a better dream than my predecessor? I have the rest of eternity to figure it out, that I know. I may live on forever, unless and until my older sister brings down the curtain upon us all. That is both the blessing and the curse of being one of the endless. We are afforded infinite things to try, and infinite are the ways in which we may fail. And we must suffer the consequences of our actions forever. Such is the high cost of living. Some would say death is the kinder of her two aspects. My father certainly thought so. Weary from the weight of my own thoughts, I gather a handful of dream sand from the pouch at my side, and cast it into the air. As the glinting granules scattered and fell, they formed into the far-reaching dunes of the dreaming's shifting zones. And thus, I pass from Destiny's garden into my own realm. The hippogriff, wyvern, and griffin guarding the castle gates welcomed me with the traditional pleasantries. I pushed through the doors of horn and ivory, which let in true dreams and lies respectively. I wondered, briefly, which one let me through. Or was it both? Truly, I was in a strange mood. My father, who crafted these doors, would never have had such thoughts. He would not even have considered the question relevant, were it posed to him. Crossing the ruined foyer of the once cathedral-like main hall, I made my way toward the entrance of the library. For there it was that all books are stored, every book that has ever been written or dreamt of. Many, many books in my vast collection are stories which the Creator abandoned, left unfinished, or never wrote down in tangible form at all. Stories took the form of books here in the dreaming, as their physical, symbolic representation, but in truth, the stories contained within could be in any imaginable form or medium. Moreover, these were complete editions, with as many different versions as authors who contemplated a given story. This means each reader or listener's version was included as well. Your conception of, say, Robin Hood differs from the one who first told the tale, and all are included in the book of that name. Each book, therefore, was its own universe, its own reality, with all the ever-branching possibilities contained within. This is why I was certain of one thing: the book, which erstwhile belonged to Destiny, belonged in the library. On my way I saw Mervyn Pumpkinhead, hard at work on the restoration of the castle interior. He was painting the walls white marble instead of black, and as usual he was complaining. It is difficult for me to describe how I knew this was usual behavior for him, as I had never technically heard his complaints before, with my own ears, yet, I remembered. It's very strange to be able to access your own father's memories. I suppose I could liken it to having read a private diary, written in exhaustively vivid detail. He was complaining to Nwala, a fairy with messy, dull brown hair the color of a mouse, a sallow complexion, and a body too thin to be considered beautiful by most. Her short, plain and sleeveless dress was the color of a wilted pink rose, and hung loosely on her sinewy frame. At least I assume she was who Mervyn was talking to, as she was the only other sentient being in the hall, polishing the new marble to a gleaming luster. As she saw me enter she froze, uncertain how to react.
I tell you, the nerve of that guy,
growled the voice emanating from the pumpkin head, around the stogie cigar that was ever-presently hanging from his carved mouth. The smoke of the cigar wafted out of his nose and eye holes.
I get smashed to bits, and the first thing he does is put me back to work. No rest for old Mervyn, no sir. It's all fix the castle Mervyn, it's much too dark in here. As if redecorating the place is all it takes to make it his own. Won't wash away all his daddy issues, that's for sure.
You may be right Mervyn, I said, and at that, Mervyn abruptly stopped moving. His pumpkin head turned on the stick that served as his body, until he faced me with a worried expression.
Well hi there boss,
he said, the carved mouth and eyes shifting to produce a forced smile.
You know I was just kidding right? Maybe you don't know that kid, but I'm a kidder. Me and your dad, we love to kid each other all the time. It was just one of those things, you know? He didn't take it personal or nothing. Knew how to take a joke, that guy.
That is not true Mervyn, I countered. My father was not, as you say, a kidder, nor did he find your behavior overly amusing.
Please forgive him, Dream Lord.
Nwala, trembling, beseeched. I realized, then, that they were terrified of me. They knew not whether I was like my father, cold and taciturn, and given to fits of temper. I smiled at them, reassuringly. There is nothing to forgive Mervyn. You are as you are, and that is fine with me.
Most gracious say you, Majesty,
said Mervyn, unconvinced. And if I did not give you back to the task for which you were created, what would you be? I asked. Would you prefer to be without a given purpose? I can certainly grant you this freedom, if you wish. Mervyn startled.
No. Forget I said anything. Kidder, remember? Sometimes I just say stuff. Velp, look at me just wasting time chatting when there's a castle to be restored and changed. Back to work I go.
Mervyn made quite a show of returning to his task of repainting the walls, humming a tune so badly no one could have said what it was supposed to be. I doubted that I had succeeded in setting his mind at ease. He still believed that I would unmake him, or worse. And you, Nwala, I said to her, and she nearly jumped out of her pointed shoes when I directed my attention to her. You no longer need to avoid using your glamour. I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, me neither,
chuckled Mervyn darkly, his carved grin widening and his painting slowing to a crawl.
So how about it, Toots? You gonna go back to being all hot and curvaceous?
Nwala frowned.
I'd rather not,
she replied. I nodded. As you will, I said, and continued on my way. Change. That word echoed and resonated in my mind. That was what none of us could contend with very well, and what ultimately caused much of our pain. As I was ruminating on the subject of change, almost stepping into the library, outside of which hung a sign, reading library staff not responsible for anything lost or found within, signed the librarian, Lucian, Mervyn stopped painting once more.
Say, boss,
he ventured, calling out to me from the other side of the hall.
What's that book you got there?
Nwala swatted his pumpkin head with her cleaning rag.
Quiet, you,
she squeaked.
It's clearly nothing he wants to share with us.
I regarded the tome in my hand. This? I said, I see no reason I cannot share it with you. Both of their faces fell in wide-eyed, open-mouthed astonishment.
Really, Dream Lord? You mean it?
Questioned Nuala. Yes, I said, honestly a bit puzzled. Why wouldn't I?
Well, I dunno, but your dear old dad certainly wouldn't have,
said Mervyn.
He thought he was so much more clever than the rest of us. He didn't think us regular Joes were worth letting in on any of his hocus-pocus, mumbo-jumbo secret stuff. And pretty much everything that guy did was a big damn secret, for some reason.
Mervyn paused, momentarily.
Say, you don't mind me talking smack about your daddy, do ya? It's not like you knew him or nothing.
I halfway smiled at that. His statement was both true and untrue. I was beginning to see the reason my father avoided explaining anything to Mervyn. It promised to be an endless, and ultimately, fruitless, endeavor.
And if you do mind, I'm only
kidding. Yes, I know. I reflected for a second. Would you like to see inside the book, Mervyn? Mervyn didn't speak immediately. He tentatively held out his stick-like, green-gloved hands.
Yeah, sure.
I placed it in his grasp, and he stumbled forward from the weight of it. He opened the front cover, and then his pumpkin head began to shake, his expressions changing rapidly, cycling through many different emotions. In only a few moments, the pumpkin shell was already cracking, deforming. A black, winged shape darted between us, snatching up the book mid-flight, and dropping it upon the marble floor. Matthew the Raven alighted on the floor next to it, breathing hard.
You blathering idiot.
He cawed.
I realize you ain't got brains in that hollow head of yours, never asked the wizard for 'em, but come on. You're lucky I came in when I did, pal. If I hadn't, there'd be nothing else we could do, except maybe scoop up this platter and make pumpkin pie out of it.
Nuala knelt by Mervyn's side.
Mervyn. What happened?
Mervyn held his pumpkin head with his spindly wooden hand, sweat glistening from the orange vegetable flesh. He was shaking still, but not as he was before.
I think I'm dying toots.
He rasped.
Can you put on your glamour for me, just one more time before I go?
Absolutely,
said Nuala. In that instant transforming into a tall, buxom blonde in a flowing green dress adorned with flowers. Mervyn sighed, laying his pumpkin head upon her bosom.
Ah, that's better. You know, I think I just might find the strength to live after all.
Nuala, realizing she'd been had, made an indignant sound and transformed back to her true self. Without the support of her voluptuous chest, his pumpkin head fell into her lap, and then slid off onto the floor.
Ow,
said Mervyn, into the marble tile. I apologize, Mervyn, I said. I did not realize the effect it would have upon you. Mervyn's head turned once more to face me.
Boss, did you just apologize to me?
A tall man with spectacles and pointed ears emerged from behind the library doors.
To be expected, I'm afraid,
said the librarian, whose name was Lucian.
Our castle handyman is not equipped to handle the information overload that often occurs when one tries to read books of this type.
What type is that, Lush?
Asked Mervyn, rising with a groan.
Of the type that reside in the castle library,
said Lucian, stepping near the book and stooping to pick it up. I placed a hand on his arm. Wait, Lucian, I asked. I promised him the story that the book contains, and I wish to honor that promise. However, perhaps it would be best if I read it. Mervyn grinned.
Boy holy. Will wonders never cease? First the apologizing, now the boss is gonna read us a story.
Matthew the Raven flew up to my shoulder, and peered at me quizzically.
Are you for real, boss?
Yes, I am completely in earnest, I replied. Why does everyone question me?
Just not used to it is all.
Shrugged Matthew, before screaming in his sharp raven voice.
Hey, gather around everybody, it's story time.
Did someone say story time? Said a low and nervous voice behind me. It was Abel, the first murder victim. Or the dream version of him, at least. He was a short, rotund man with a dark goatee, and the hair atop his head slicked back. In his hands was a golden baby gargoyle, which gave an excited chirp of when it saw me. I am embarrassed to say that I almost responded by crying out "Doggy," which was what I called him as a small child, before I grew up and learned that this was not at all the correct term. Goldie, I said fondly. That was his proper name. He flew to me and I cradled him, as he nuzzled contentedly against the white fabric of my robes. I missed you.
Okay, I'm out.
Said Matthew the Raven, hopping on my shoulder to turn himself about and face the other direction.
I can tell when I'm not wanted. I was once the cool pet, back when Morpheus was boss. But, you know how it is, nevermore.
He flew off, but he did not get far, for he alighted on the outstretched arm of a woman. Mother? I said, hesitantly. The woman, whose hair was dyed an unnatural red, streaked with an equally unnatural blonde collected in a single stripe on one side, looked at me and smiled. Her eyes, the color of emeralds, sparkled.
Hello, Daniel.
I must say, I was intimidated by the sudden presence of my human mother. The vortex. That is what my father called her. He once had every intention of killing her, to spare the dreaming from disruption and chaos. Or, perhaps more accurately, to spare himself the disruption of change. What was she doing here? I asked the question aloud of her, and she laughed a little.
You're my son.
She answered.
I wanted to see how you were doing.
And how has this come to pass?
How am I in the dreaming? I'm asleep, of course.
I meant in the castle. In the very heart of the dreaming.
I've been here before. I remembered.
So you weren't caught in the reality storm, I take it?
Nothing happened. Literally, nothing. It was weird.
I don't follow. She sighed, making herself comfortable on a bit of rubble. She was clothed in something resembling my father's cloak, but faded. It wrapped loosely around her in the manner of a toga, with no discernible ties or clasps. It stayed in place where she wanted, and for that I am grateful, for while I am not terribly prudish about the sight of mortal bodies unclothed, nor the form of any being in any state for that matter, seeing my mother thus exposed would have caused me no small amount of discomfort. Idly stroking Matthew's glossy black feathers, she tried again to explain herself.
You know how, in a dream, you can walk from one room into another, and on the other side is a totally different place?
She began.
You don't realize how abnormal it is for your childhood home and your high school to be in the same building, but you go with it, because everyone else in your dream is acting like it's always been that way. Then you wake up, and you remember, those two places were miles away from each other. Hell, you weren't even living in that house anymore by the time you started high school. That's what it was like. A few moments after the transition happened, I woke up. And I remembered.
She paused, her expression darkening.
Nobody else did though. I guess because, in this case, it was the other way around. The dream was real, and the reality, the one I remembered anyway, was not. It was like it never existed.
I see. Does this have anything to do with the power that was briefly in your possession? My mother shrugged.
Beats me. So, are you going to tell the story, or not?
The other servants of the dreaming were gathering around me, figuring out their seating arrangements. Nwala had found a broken chair which remained serviceable enough, and was currently employed in dusting it off. Before she was finished, Mervyn sat down upon it instead, beckoning toward her with his scarecrow-like arms and patting his lap to indicate where he desired her to sit. Taking some dream sand from its pouch, I willed it to form a plush-cushioned armchair next to Nwala. She smiled at me gratefully, and then primly lowered herself into the seat while glancing with disdain at Mervyn. Mervyn folded his arms and slumped in his broken chair, unhappily puffing smoke out of his eye holes. I summoned a marble bench from the upstairs balcony for myself, and set Goldie the gargoyle beside me. He chirped his little cry of sounding a bit hurt. I opened up the enormous book. I heard the scraping of furniture legs against the marble tile, before I saw Abel pushing the tattered and dirty sofa toward us. He stopped, mopping the sweat from his brow, breathing hard. I'm ready, Dream Lord, he stammered.
Does that sofa not belong in the House of Secrets?
Inquired Lucian, who seemed perfectly contented to stand. Yes. Well, why do you ask, Lucian?
Why did you bring it all the way here? Lord Dream is most capable of fashioning something suitable for you.
It's comfortable. It's where my brother Cain tells me stories. Suddenly, the seat cushions burst forth from the sofa. A thin man, his every feature sharp and cruel, emerged from underneath. He grinned and threw out his arms, gesturing so that his long fingers looked like claws.
Surprise!
He yelled, leaping to his feet atop the sofa frame. Abel startled backward and landed on his rump. Cain, what are you doing here? Cain lowered his arms and narrowed his eyes.
Didn't want to invite me to this gathering of yours, did you? Wanted to keep it your little secret, little brother?
Secret? No, insisted Abel, scuttling backward and raising an arm protectively, as Cain stepped down off the sofa.
Then why are you afraid, brother?
Asked Cain, ominously. Your fists. They're clenched like you will want to hit me, said Abel, flinching.
You're not really going to hurt him, are you?
Said my mother, frowning with disapproval at Cain. Cain noticed her, and relaxed. He took her hand.
I don't believe I've properly made your acquaintance, lady.
Rose.
She answered, still looking at him warily, and clearly considering yanking her hand out of his grasp.
Rose Walker. I'm Daniel's mother.
The mother of our illustrious Dream Lord. Well, this is an honor then. I am Cain, purveyor of penny dreadful shilling shockers, blood and thunders and first-rate nightmares. And you mustn't worry about that gap-toothed stuttering blubbery half-wit brother of mine. I kill him quite frequently and he always recovers.
I was growing impatient with these social proceedings, and eager to commence with the story. Now, if everyone is quite settled, I will start at the beginning.
Terrible place to start, Lord,
objected Cain. What do you mean by that?
Because whatever it is you're inclined to explain in the beginning would be put to better use as a secret to be held onto and revealed later,
asserted Cain.
Therefore, wherever it is you think you ought to start, don't.
I do not remember asking for your advice, Cain. Are you going to be telling this story, or should I?
I would be glad to, if you would but grant me the honor,
said Cain, walking toward me with hand outstretched to receive the book. Abel put a hand on his brother's sleeve, tugging on it. Don't, brother, this is not a regular type of book. It nearly destroyed Mervyn. Cain forcefully ripped his sleeve away.
The nerve of you comparing me to an empty-headed lummox like that.
Hey,
cried Mervyn Pumpkinhead.
I'm sitting right here.
Yes. And the only mystery concerning you is how you can hear us despite a lack of ears,
said Cain nastily.
Humph. Say goodbye to me doing any work around your place,
grumbled Mervyn.
Next time you see a nice fluffy cloud or a clear blue summer sky, maybe you should give some thought as to who painted them.
Cain returned his attention to me.
I beseech you, Lord, please do not begin at the actual beginning. Do not be tempted to flatter our present company by telling the tale of Mum and Dad's goings-on in the garden, or what transpired after their eviction.
Is that your concern? No, Cain, fear not, I had no intention of reaching that far back.
All right then.
Cain sat down, looking strangely disappointed. Abel was getting comfortable next to him, munching on popcorn from a red and white carton.
Where did you get that?
He asked. I was keeping it inside the cushions, said Abel, and tipped the carton toward him. Do you want some? Cain made a contorted face.
You're disgusting,
said Cain. He leaned toward my mother Rose, shielding his mouth conspiratorially but speaking loud enough for all to hear.
The state of his bathroom. I'm not one to gossip, but there are things crusted on his sink that have not simply developed intelligent life, but have, in all probability by now, evolved their own political systems.
Everyone was finally settled, and looking at me eagerly. Now then, I said, opening the book to the proper place. Let us begin. The Garden of Destiny. You would know it if you saw it. After all, you will wander it until you die. Or beyond. For the paths are long, and even in death there is no ending to them. The paths fork and divide, branch and recombine to form a maze. With each step you take through Destiny's garden, you make a choice, and every choice determines future paths. At the end of a lifetime, you might look back, and see only one path stretching out behind you, or look ahead, and see only darkness. On either side of the path, the memories of people and places, buildings and things, are suspended in time for the purpose of display and reminiscing. In this spot may be a new temple of stone, and in the next section, separated by a mere row of hedges, is the same temple in a ruinous state. There are statues in the garden. Huge statues. If they move, as some claim they do, it is too slowly to be perceived. These statues depict beings who are more than gods, and like the garden's perpetual dawn/dusk light, they are endless. You perceive but aspects of the endless as light glinting from one tiny facet of some huge and flawlessly cut precious stone. You will spend time in the realm of each of Destiny's siblings. You will dream, despair, desire, destroy, delight and otherwise. And, eventually, die. Destiny is the oldest of the endless. In the beginning was the Word, and it was traced by hand on the first page of his book, before ever it was spoken aloud. There are few who have seen beneath the shadow of his hood, but those who have spied his eyes of milky white believe him to be blind, whilst others, perhaps with more reason, claim that he has travelled far beyond blindness. That indeed, he can do nothing but see the fine traceries the galaxies make as they spiral through the void, the intricate patterns living things make on their journey through time, the movement of atoms, and he sees little difference between them. He wanders the pathways of the garden, as you do, reading from a book chained to his wrists, or, perhaps it is he who is chained to the book. It is impossible to tell. You were his from the very first page, and only he will read how your story comes out, a long time from now. His grey cloak pools around his bare feet, leaving no footprints. Now his path takes him into his dwelling, a place of corridors and halls. The life-sized, gilt-framed paintings hanging in the gallery of Destiny's Hall show his brothers and sisters as they might wish to be seen by the viewer at any given moment, although the wish and the thing are so close in the realm of the endless that you cannot get a thin-bladed knife between them. Sister Death, he said, addressing a painting of a pale young woman in a svelte black dress, a white hand resting upon the handle of a black umbrella, and an ankh pendant resting on the white flesh of her plunging décolletage. Do stop making that noise and expression, Mervyn. She is, after all, my elder sister. Under her black wide-brimmed hat was a beautiful pale face with kind eyes, one of which was lined in kohl with an eye of Horus design. When the first living thing existed, she was there, waiting, and she converses with everything that is born or created, though no one seems to remember that particular conversation. In the end, she is there for all of them. When the last living thing dies, her job is finished. She will put the chairs on the tables, turn out the lights, and lock the universe behind her when she leaves. It is I, Destiny of the Endless, who calls you, Destiny announced. Come. Death stepped forth, her form morphing outward from the painted figure. Stepping past the frame of gilt gold, her long, black lace-up heels clicked daintily upon the marble floor. She fluffed out her short skirt of black tulle, and smiled brightly at our brother.
"Hi, big brother. What's up?"
she said. Destiny rather pointedly compared her to the more sophisticated image of the painting.
"Oh, come on, don't you even start,"
warned Death, fussing with the boutonniere made of a brown, dry, wilted flower pinned to her hair, which was a mess of split ends.
"You know how much I hate wearing this stuff. Next you're gonna tell me how I ought to get a scythe."
Very well. I am satisfied. He moved on to the painting of Dream, who accumulated names to himself as others make friends, but he permitted himself few friends. You who are assembled here would know him best as Morpheus. Dream. Ah, that is a conundrum. Dreams shape the world. He moves from dreamer to dreamer, flickering through their dreams, and the dreamer will wake, and wonder why this dream seemed different. Wonder how real their lives can truly be. This painting showed a pale man, whose normally wild hair was currently corralled within the bounds of a tricorn hat. He stood in the shadow of an old tree, silhouetted in the silver moonlight, which spilled upon the shoulder of his dark flowing cloak and glinted off the ruby scepter supporting his rake-thin frame. At his waist was a pouch of sand in place of a coin purse, and painted at his feet was the impression of a strange helmet, made from the skull of a dead god. "Brother Dream, the family must meet," said Destiny. "It is I, Brother, I too am fond of ceremony, but you need not introduce yourself," the painted figure of Morpheus mouthed. He stepped out past the gilt frame as his sister had done, though more elegantly. "I doubt any of us have forgotten you in the centuries since our last family meeting." Morpheus took note of Death. Well, you have dressed formally also, I see." He tipped his tricorn hat, revealing wild dark hairs that were coming loose from the constraints of his queue. "My compliments." Death responded most maturely, by sticking out her tongue. Destiny moved past a frame covered by a red curtain. If he gave it any thought, he did not show it. But although the painting in the gallery was hidden from view, the statue in the outside gardens portrayed a towering warrior, a mass of hulking muscle in armor. He was turned away to face the opposite direction as his siblings, with his back to the light. Everything created has an end. He is change incarnate, and to battle him is futile. Nothing can escape him. That is the way of destruction. Next came the portrait of Desire. No image may do Desire justice, for to see her, or him, is to love him, or her, passionately, painfully, and to the exclusion of all else. Never a possession, always the possessor. Desire is everything you have ever wanted. As such, the portrait did not even attempt to capture their likeness. Instead, Desire chose to present themselves as outrageously as possible. It was, after all, amongst siblings. The figure in the portrait was an androgynous figure in pastel frills and an extravagant brocade vest, astride a white horse. Desire held their riding crop teasingly, a sly smile playing across red full lips, underneath the brim of a top hat turned coyly downward over one tawny eye the color of yellow wine. When Desire dismounted into the hall, unbidden by destiny, they wore another outfit entirely, a corset, a garter with stockings, and a locked chastity belt codpiece. Desire smelled of sweat, late nights, sour wines, cheap perfume, and leather. They cast two shadows, one black and sharp-edged, the other translucent and wavering like a heat haze.
A family meeting, eh? Destiny?
Drawled Desire, languorously.
I knew you wanted to have one.
They nodded toward Dream.
And I imagine he knew the moment that you dreamed it up. But what's the occasion?
If you have ever seen a painting by Henry Fuseli titled Silence, then you have a general idea of what Despair's portrait looked like, except she was nude, and rather corpulent. The hair that fell in front of her despondent, down-turned head was messy, greasy, and hopelessly tangled. Despair, Desire's twin, is queen of a bleak domain of tiny windows, hanging in the void, each window being, in your world, a mirror. Sometimes you will look into a mirror and feel the eyes of Despair upon you, feel her hook catch and snag on your heart. She lumbered forward out of the gilt frame, her saggy grey flesh jostling unpleasantly, accompanied by a musky and pungent odour like the skin of a snake. Her cold and clammy bare feet, with its long and yellowed toenails, slapped the floor. Despair pulled her scraggly hair back, roughly, tying it into a sloppy top knot. It was then that one could see the thick brows, overshadowing the sunken pits surrounding her eyes, which were the color of sky on the gray, wet days that leach the world of color and meaning. Long tusks jutted out from her wide, down-turned mouth, the thick grey lips obscuring rows of tiny sharp teeth.
Destiny will tell us that, in his own time,
spoke Despair, in little more than a whisper.
He won't be rushed.
Desire regarded the museum hall with undisguised disapproval.
Humph. I'll say, he only redecorates every 300 years.
Desire then looked Destiny up and down, and sighed dramatically.
And still with the basic grey. What is lost time to us?
Said Despair.
We have all the time there is.
The final painting was of a strawberry blonde young girl in a straw hat, standing in a sunlit field upon the crest of a grassy hill, gazing with radiant joy at a handful of pink and gold flowers. However, the girl who emerged was quite different. Her appearance is the most variable of all the endless, who, at best, are ideas cloaked in the semblance of flesh. Her shadow's shape and outline has no relationship to that of any body she wears.
I lost some time once. It's always in the last place you look for it,
she said, her voice warbling strangely, shifting tone and volume at random intervals. She noticed that 5 other pairs of eyes were directed her way, and gestured nervously, in something that must have begun as a wave of greeting but turned into a fluttering motion when she thought better of it.
Hi. It's, me.
Delirium was one's delight. As she grew up, or at least grew older, the blossoms began to fall in her domain, becoming smudged and formless colors. She now resembled a young teenager, and was dressed in an oversized and ragged coat. Her hair was wild and wavy, and she had mismatched gloves, shoes and socks, all with holes in them. Even her eyes were mismatched, one a vivid green, one vein blue and filled with flecks of silver, which swam about like a school of fish. Who knows what delirium sees through her mismatched eyes?
Isn't it nice, all of us, together like this? It's so nice.
She murmured to herself, in an almost sing-songy manner.
How you doing, sis?
Asked Death. Delirium chewed on her hair and fiddled with her clothing.
Well, yesterday I did some bad stuff. I mean, real bad. You know.
She brightened.
But today I did some good things.
Then, her eyebrows knit together.
I don't know.
She admitted, trembling. She glanced at Despair sidelong.
You know.
Despair nodded, she did indeed. Death patted Delirium on the back reassuringly, and Delirium responded with a hug. One initiated by pouncing upon her sister desperately, like a drowning cat upon a piece of driftwood. Now that we are all assembled, began Destiny, before noticing that all of his siblings, at that moment, turned to look at the painting covered up with the red curtain. They had just realized that one of their number would not be joining them.
I kinda hoped he had changed his mind,
said Death, sadly.
I miss him,
moaned Delirium.
We all miss him,
said Despair, in a hollow voice like an echo.
I don't,
refuted Desire. Hush, said Destiny. He has made his intentions perfectly clear. Let us, who still consider ourselves family, go to the refectory. There are things to discuss.
Yes,
agreed Delirium wholeheartedly, as she and the others followed Destiny.
Like, I met this guy in this club in somewhere, late at night. I don't know where it was.
Delirium spotting Death's wilted flower boutonniere, which she snatched off and made glow in rainbow colors as they walked.
He wanted to kiss me, but I don't like to be touched, so I did this stuff to him. So he only saw colors. Real pretty colors though.
The flower in her hand transformed into 2 butterflies and flew off.
Pretty. I just made butterflies. Look, everybody. Look at what I just did. Butterflies.
The endless siblings were led to a 7-sided dining table, laden with fruit and lit with candles. Grey apparitions floated about as servers, pulling out chairs and placing cups, plates and bowls upon the table. The endless, save for the exception of Destiny who remained standing, took their seats. And then there was silence.
Well, here we all are,
announced Death, as an icebreaker. Delirium fidgeted and squirmed in her chair.
Yes. Here we. Sometimes. I forget what I was going to say.
At last, Destiny spoke. I suppose you must be wondering why I called you all here. Yes, said Dream, whose impatience was clear despite only meaning to sound neutral. Partially, it concerns our wayward brother Destruction, said Destiny. But in truth, all of the Endless have begun to tilt toward their most negative extremes. This cannot last, or there will be severe consequences. For us, and for those we serve.
I serve no one,
contended Desire. You do serve, insisted Destiny. Remember this always, we of the Endless are the servants of the living, we are not their masters. We exist because they know, deep in their hearts, that we exist. And we do not manipulate them. If anything, they manipulate us. We are their toys, their dolls, if you will. And you, and Despair, and our poor Delirium, should remember that. When the last living thing has left this universe, then our task will be done. And unless something is done, that may soon come to pass. Destiny paused. But none of you are capable of producing the shift that needs to occur. At least, not of your own volition. Something important will happen. Something that sparks a chain of events, causing much change and upheaval.
And what is that something?
Asked Despair. This meeting, said Destiny, taking a seat at last. The other siblings waited a moment for him to continue, but when it became apparent that he had no such intention, they exchanged confused glances. You must explain this further, said Dream. No, answered Destiny, flatly. That is all. Desire cocked an eyebrow as their red lips sipped from a glass of wine.
All you know, or all you'll say.
I have brought you all here. The rest is up to you. As another awkward, perturbed silence took hold, Dream stood up abruptly. This is foolish. I have duties to attend to. I will leave now. That will not happen, said Destiny. Yet.
Oh, come on, hang around for a little,
urged Death.
It's been centuries since we were all together. We must have things to talk about, right?
Dream sat back down stiffly, arms crossed. Death picked a grape from a cluster, and offered it to him.
Have a grape.
I do not want a grape. Desire grinned.
I could make you want a grape.
Dream scowled.
I am Desire, am I not?
Continued Desire, pressing the point.
That is what I do. I make things want things.
Delirium's butterflies flew past, and Desire idly touched both of them. One of the butterflies darted with purpose toward a candle on the table, with the other following in pursuit.
Where I touch,
said Desire, in a low voice.
Things want, need, love, drawn to their desire. Like butterflies to a flame. Moths.
Corrected Despair, passed her hand miserably clawing at her face. As Desire's twin, she anticipated what was to come, for wherever Desire went, Despair soon followed.
You mean moths?
Delirium gasped as the first of the butterflies flew right into the candle's flame, its body consumed and wings turning brown. The other followed immediately after. Desire's grin flashed, like the slash wound of a knife.
Butterflies,
they said with relish. Delirium jumped up on her seat.
Those were mine.
She shrieked with uncontrolled rage, punctuating each word by stomping upon the table. The tremor ran through the table, causing the bowls, plates and glassware to clink and clatter. Death outstretched her hand, and the ghosts of the butterflies alighted upon it.
They're yours now, sister,
said Despair, with some relief.
Yes,
said Death softly, gazing down at the butterflies. Delirium was still twitching at Desire.
You didn't have to do that.
Desire chuckled.
Oh, I know, I really didn't. But I wanted to, dear sister.
Don't laugh at me, Desire. Don't make fun of me.
Delirium pointed at Destiny.
I know lots of things not even he knows. Do you?
Calm yourself, little sister, intoned Destiny.
I'm calm, I'm so calm.
Despair sighed.
We never argued like this when destruction was here. He would have made a joke or something. Who's arguing? I'm not arguing,
said Desire.
We're having a perfectly civilized conversation.
The knife-like grin reappeared.
Isn't that right, Delight?
Delirium sat back down, slowly, her face slipping into the shadow of her high-backed chair.
Delight. Was a long time ago.
she said, ominously.
Oops,
Said Desire with a flippant shrug.
silly me.
We bicker pointlessly because we have nothing to discuss, said the sonorous tones of Dream.
Well, what about you, my brother?
Inquired Desire, leaning forward eagerly, over clasped hands.
How's your love life? Have you kept in touch with that old flame of yours? I'm sure things have been hell for her.
Dream clenched his teeth. You dare? Desire snapped their fingers.
Nada. That was her name. As well as what you left her with. I nearly forgot.
Sometimes I remember things everyone else has forgotten forever and always.
Such a sweet child.
Desire went on, as Dream quietly fumed.
I know, I could taste her heart. She really did love you, for some reason. And so pretty too. But what you put her through wasn't very pretty at all. Because she wouldn't stay with you until you tired of her. Because she hurt your petty pride. You've had her tortured for. What has it been now? 10,000 years.
Dream rose up and slammed his fist on the table. Enough. Why, you shall do nothing in this place, brother Dream, said Destiny, calmly. Dream straightened, composing himself. I believe I will go outside, I do not care for the company here. He turned briskly, dark cape slicing the air, and stormed out onto a balcony.
Well, what's the matter with him?
Said Desire, putting their fingers to their lips coquettishly.
Do you think it was something I said?
Death rose from her chair and gave Desire an icy look.
Desire, if you ever want to speak again, shut up.
Desire's eyes went wide, cowed into silence, as they watched Death go out to the balcony after Dream.
You feeling okay?
Asked Death of her brother, who leaned upon the railing of the balcony, overlooking the Garden of Time. Dream turned about, folding his arms. No. I am not feeling okay. You know how I felt for her once. What I feel for her still. Death took a spot next to him, leaning over the balcony herself.
Desire's right, Nada loved you. She really did.
I would have made her a goddess, lamented Dream. But she defied me. I gave her due warning, but still she spurned me. So
you sentenced her to hell?
A distant look came into the dark pools of Dream's eyes. Yes, he whispered.
You did a terrible thing to that poor girl. You acted appallingly.
Dream snapped to attention, pointing at her dramatically. What? You too? Even you turn on me, sister? Death put her hands on her hips.
Oh, just shut up and let me finish. You can shout at me afterwards.
Dream lowered his arm, grim with barely suppressed rage. Desire has no right to mock me for a situation they directly caused.
Desire might have given you desire. But they cannot force you to do anything. Condemning someone to an eternity in hell just because she turned you down, that's a really shitty thing to do.
Death paused a moment, then drew in breath and exhaled.
Okay. I've finished. You can shout at me now.
But instead, Dream buried his face in his hand. Is this how you truly feel? That I have been unjust? Death almost imperceptibly winced, then nodded.
Yes.
Dream lifted his chin, his frame straightening to become rigid and resolute. Very well. My course is clear. He placed the tricorn hat back upon his head. Pray tell my siblings I was needed elsewhere, and could not stay. Though it might mean my doom, I must journey to hell. He took up Death's pale hand and kissed it chastely. Adieu.
You too, Dream.
Dream poured sand out from his pouch and onto his hand. He threw the sand in the air, and it swirled around him.
Hey Dream.
He looked up. Death gave him a worried smile.
Don't do anything stupid.
Dream's physical form began to fade away, leaving Death with only the sound of his voice. "I am afraid it is too late for that admonition," he said, his voice now fading as well. "Either I shall bring Nada out of hell, or I shall see you again soon, my sister. One final time." Inside, Destiny turned the page of his book to follow along with the events transpiring. If any of his siblings were watching or listening, which they were not, they would have seen him grimace and let out a frustrated sigh. "So that is how it must be," he murmured to himself. "I see. My work begins now." Then, louder, he announced to the others, "This meeting is adjourned." Destiny snapped the book shut with a puff of dust, the sound echoing like thunder in the great hall. I lifted my gaze to check how my audience was doing, unsure from their silence whether they were pleased thus far. Their expressions gave me no further clue, except for Kane, who scowled and shook his head. "What is the matter, Kane?"
"Where is the drama in this scene?"
he asked.
"Are we really supposed to care about a dull family meeting, with a bit of petty squabbling providing our only source of conflict?"
Not to mention the oblique references to past events, which many of us have no context for,
said Lucien.
"I thought you said you would start at the beginning."
"This is the beginning," I told them. And if I explained every detail, Lucien, it would upset Kane even further.
"I'm not upset,"
said Kane.
"I merely think you should allow me to coach you, Dream Lord, until you are ready to take on the full mantle of the Prince of Stories."
"You will understand in due time," I assured them. "I think it's nice that no one's killed anybody yet," said Abel.
"You would, wouldn't you?"
said Kane, clucking his tongue.
"Minnie, stories aren't about being nice. There's absolutely nothing juicy in that."
"I like to hear about siblings who love each other," said Abel, doubling down. There was a hint of resentment in his voice.
"I think that a murder would have livened things up a bit personally,"
said Kane.
"I have to agree with the psychopath here,"
said Mervyn.
"When's the action gonna start?"
"You men,"
said Nwala with disdain.
"I think it's rather obviously a love story. Isn't that right, Dream Lord?"
I tilted my head, considering the notion. I hadn't intended it that way, I admitted.
"What? But why?"
cried Nwala.
"Isn't Lord Morpheus going to hell to rescue his beloved? He said he still had feelings for her."
He did have feelings for Nada, but he felt guilt over what happened to her realm. Nwala gasped, placing a skinny hand over her heart.
"Was she a princess?"
"She was a queen, sole monarch of her ancient land."
"You dames, you're all the same,"
scoffed Mervyn.
"With all of those feelings of yours. Give him a tragical romance full of gushy stuff, and they go all out twinterpated. Me, I'm a regular Joe, a man's man. I go for the macho stuff. Give me a bunch of guns and explosions and stuff any day, and I'm happy."
"I do not share your enthusiasm for such nonsense,"
said Lucien.
"It all sounds dreadfully lowbrow to me."
"That's 'cause you're what fellas like me like to call a stick in the mud, Lush,"
said Mervyn.
"Learn to live a little. Sides, point is our boss just said there weren't no romance in this here story, so that means it's gotta have some action."
"I must refute both points," I said. "I did not say there would be no romance, nor did I promise action."
"What?"
cried Mervyn, smoke shooting out sideways out of his face holes in opposite directions.
"What do you mean, there's no action? If that's so, boss, then I sure won't be sticking around."
I sighed. I did not say that either. I am not making this story up as I go. These events really happened. As such, I cannot simply add a murder as you suggest, Kane.
"Great. A history lesson,"
grumbled Mervyn, sinking lower in his seat. "I can, however, choose from amongst the myriad of events that occurred," I said. from any possible viewpoint or perspective. That is why this book was impossible for you to read, Mervyn. My role as an endless allows me to see from all angles simultaneously, without becoming overwhelmed or losing my mind. I immediately regretted explaining this to them, for they all acquired a rather greedy countenance.
So you could focus more on the women and romance if you wanted to,
said Nuala, as a statement rather than a question.
Bring on the blood and guts then.
Cried Matthew the Raven.
Let's hear about hell first, that should be gruesome. And then I know for a fact that our late boss dealt with some serial killers after that, which included an escaped nightmare with a taste for eyeballs.
What, you mean? Like you?
Quipped Mervyn.
I only go for the eyes after they're dead, typically,
said Matthew, ruffling his feathers indignantly.
Big difference.
You're both awful,
said Nuala.
I have no interest in gore and serial killers.
Well, you're outnumbered toots,
said Mervyn.
There's 5 of us here, and only 2 AU.
You're wrong that all us dames, as you really shouldn't call us by the way, are all alike,
said my mother Rose.
Who says I want to hear about romance?
You don't?
Asked Nuala.
No, I don't.
Said Rose, looking away.
I hate love.
Well, that settles it,
said Mervyn.
Your audience has spoken, boss.
I didn't say I shared your preference for violent and disturbing content,
objected Lucian.
The lady is correct in her assertion that one cannot assume another's tastes based solely on their apparent gender.
Even so, you're still outnumbered,
said Mervyn. This is not a democracy, I interjected. Nor is it a choose-your-own-adventure story. There will be no voting, and I will not be asking you what you want to hear. I am telling this story, not you. And as long as this is the case, you must choose to listen, or not. There are no other options. My audience became stricken with silence. But not for long.
Well, this attitude sounds familiar,
commented Mervyn. I exhaled, attempting to compose myself. I must not let their complaints distract me, for I was not telling this story merely for their sake but for my own, in order so that I could better process and incorporate the valuable lessons within. And so, I went on, the dream that was Morpheus descended into the abyss. Hell, as some of you know, is a state of mind. It is also, therefore, a place within the dreaming. You'd be forgiven for thinking that the Lord of Dreams would have nothing to fear traversing one of his own realms, but you would still be wrong. Dream could live forever, yes, but he could also be killed, in reality or in a place that was not a place, such as hell. And hell was very dangerous indeed, one of the most dangerous of all the realms of nightmare. At any time, should the nightmares decide to rise up against their king, his incarnation would be done for. The wind that blew between worlds screamed silently through the empty places. The nothing wind, traveling from nowhere to nowhere, in the uncreated wastes. It chilled Morpheus as he fell. He was reminded of another who fell, on a night like this one, so many eons long passed away. Morpheus watched him, since the beginning of his creation, when he was the angel Samael, called Lucifer Morning Star. The name meant bringer of light. Of all the angels, he was the finest, the most beautiful, the most powerful. Morpheus also watched him fall, yet even as he fell, the morning star's face was undefeated, his eyes proud. Lucifer and Morpheus were not on the best of terms. Lucifer resented Morpheus for not intervening in the rebellion, and took it to mean that Morpheus sided with humanity, or his father, or both. For if you were not Lucifer's friend, he counted you amongst his enemies. Morpheus planned to use the main gate. He did not have to. The doors of hell are legion. There were entrances less well guarded, and more poorly defended, than the main gate, and it was no great task for Morpheus to open doors. But Morpheus believed in doing things properly. This meant dressing himself formally, as Dream of the Endless, with his helm and his ruby dreamstone pendant and the dark robes of his office. And, once he found Nada, he would meet with the Lord of Hell. He did not have high hopes for the meeting. I could stay here, said a brief thought in Morpheus' mind, abandon my quest, hang forever in the void, safe and cold and alone. Then, his inner voice answered firmly no. We do as we must do. Already the winds were dying back, signaling the transition from nowhere to where. Already the mists were parting. Welcome to hell, he told himself. And he was afraid. Welcome to hell. Morpheus landed on the nightward shores. He had not visited this domain for a very long time, and never alone. And tonight, he felt very alone. He made his way into the Wood of Suicides, which at this time was still a tiny grove compared to what it is now. The leafless, gnarled trees moaned their woes from agonized faces, on endless repeat to any who would listen. They spoke of their last thoughts as living beings, before they, voluntarily, shuffled off their mortal coil and arrived here in the form of twisted and tortured wood. They spoke of pills, plastic bags, guns, blades, rope. The details were different, but the stories were all fundamentally the same. Hurting, was the most common refrain of their miserable whispers and chorused cries. I thought the hurting would stop. Despair came here, sometimes, to check upon the souls that used to be hers, who disappeared from the sight of her mirrors with their departure. It was the only part of the dreaming she ever had any interest in visiting. Being an inferno of pain and flame and ice, where every nightmare had come true long since, it was not considered a pleasant place by the majority of its inhabitants. However, being dead, and being there, as they imagined, against their will, their opinions counted for little. And indeed, had hell been pleasant, they would have felt cheated. They were there for pain, for suffering, for torment, which they received in abundance. The other inhabitants of this place were not dead, however, neither were they alive, in any biological sense of the word. Humanity called them demons, without understanding what it had named. There was little that demonkind had in common with the legions of damned souls with whom they shared the infernal marches. However, they all agreed on one thing. This was as bad as it got. It couldn't get any worse. Morpheus approached the gate of hell, upon which many bodies were grotesquely impaled. One of the bodies held a shield, and Morpheus hit this with his fist. It rang like a gong, echoing through the wastes of hell. An orange-skinned, bipedal demon prowled out of the mists on the other side of the gate, with an axe having replaced one of its 4 claws. It had no nose or lower part of its face, just 2 large blue eyes and a gaping, forever bleeding mass of flesh that served as a tongue.
There's one at the door,
it burbled.
At the gate of damnation, is it thief, thug or whore? There's one at the door. And there's room for one more, till the end of creation. There's one at the door. At the gate of damnation. Ha!
Greetings, squatter bloat, said Morpheus, through the bars. I wish to find a prisoner, named Nada. Take me to her immediately. Squatter Bloat wheezed a laugh. As I have said, doors are no matter for dream. He pushed through them easily. I will take no insults from you, little demon, he said. Guard your tongue. But the demon did not heed the warning quickly enough, for Morpheus reached out and grabbed him by the tongue, and with a twist of his arms, sent the demon spinning through the air.
Back to your gate and duty, Squatter Bloat,
said another rough voice.
I'll take the Dream Lord, play his guardian. For innocents abroad need guides of note, and who notes more than me? The Etrigan?
The one speaking was a hunched-over demon. Etrigan, echoed Morpheus. Yes, Merlin's demon. The Halfman. I remember you. So you're a rhymer now? You've risen in Hell's hierarchy, I see.
Things change,
was Etrigan's response.
This way. Things change. In earth and hell. To rise among the fallen. Strange and true. But as things change, Lord, they transmute as well. And if I've changed, O King, then what of you?
Perhaps, said Morpheus, his favorite word and answer. But he would say no more. Meanwhile, Squatter Bloat moved out into the wood of suicides, and appeared to be telling them to clear off, in rhyme no doubt. For those that did not uproot themselves and move of their own volition, he began chopping them down with his axe hand. The trees would roll away, following the others. This greatly puzzled Morpheus, but he would not stop to ask about the goings-on of hell, at least not yet, not until he had found Nada. And not of a rank-and-file demon. Surely there would be time enough to ask the Morning Star himself for an explanation. But Nada came first. Nada was held in the cliffs that circle Weep Not, in a barred cell carved from rock, lined with needle-sharp shards of volcanic glass. There is no food or water in that place. Morpheus supposed that she must be hungry, and that she had been hungry for a very long time. He reached into the pouch and touched the sand inside. He sifted it through his fingers, feeling each grain of it, inexhaustible, endless. Like himself, and myself, like the few others of our kind. Endless. Morpheus climbed the winding and jagged path up the cliff, thinking about what he would use the dream sand for, once he found her, to leave this place. First of all, that much was clear. Then to go to a place that would suit her, that would be filled with food and all the other comforts that had been denied to her in this place. As Morpheus neared her cell, he felt relief. Strange, he thought. I cannot believe that my task can be this simple. But perhaps it will be. Perhaps I will simply inform Nada that she is free, and we will leave this place together, unchallenged and unharmed. Perhaps. And he was just about to remove his helmet, made of the skull of a dead god, so that Nada would not think he was yet another demon come to torture her. But before he could do so, he looked inside the cell. It was empty. Nada? He asked, into the nothingness. Nada. His mind raced. They have taken her, he thought. They have hidden her from me. But then he noticed that there was something deeply wrong. Even for hell, there was something wrong. He listened. Silence, pure and dead. He felt with his mind. Nothing. It was not just Nada who had gone. They had all gone. The dead, and the never-born. All of them. Where were they? Where was she? What trickery was this? Even Etrigan, his guide up until that point, was gone.
Hello, dream,
said a beautiful voice in the air behind him, but it was not Nada's voice. It belonged to a man. Morpheus turned to see a youthful-looking man of exquisite features, held aloft by dark, bat-like wings. Lucifer. Where is she? Asked Morpheus, with none of the civility he had intended to use when greeting the morning star.
Take off that silly helmet, and we'll talk.
Morpheus made no move.
Why, sweet Morpheus? Are you scared of me?
Lucifer asked, mockingly. When still no answer came, Lucifer shrugged and sighed dramatically.
Very well. I promise, no harm will come to you while we are in the bounds of hell.
Morpheus pulled off the helmet, and Lucifer nodded with approval.
Much better. You want to know what is going on?
Yes.
Isn't it obvious, Dream King?
Said Lucifer, grinning proudly.
I've quit.
Lucifer waited for that idea to sink in, but Morpheus wasn't sure how to react. Lucifer frowned.
Honestly, Morpheus, you need not stare at us, at me, rather, with that ridiculous expression on your face.
I do not understand. There is some trick here, some stratagem or ruse.
No, I've stopped. I've resigned. I am leaving. Can I make myself any plainer?
You. You refer to yourself in the singular, morning star.
Exactly. I have no need for the royal we anymore. I am no king. Not anymore.
Lucifer flew away and downward. Morpheus followed, flying with him over the empty hell, and tried to process what had occurred. How? How can you even?
Easy. 10 billion years I've spent in this place. That's a long time.
Perhaps, Prince Lucifer.
You can forget the honorifics.
Snapped Lucifer.
Rank never mattered to me, not really. But the demons expected it. Which is one reason I quit.
Lucifer gestured over the vasty plains of hell, where demons once roamed.
Imagine being their lord and master. 1 million of them, or more, squabbling and warring and carrying on. I watched their strange little fashions. The centuries they spent wearing the bodies of animals. The ridiculous vogue for rhyme to denote status, demons who spoke exclusively in villanelles, haiku or triolets, and above all, the fashion of intrigue.
Lucifer let out an incredulous huff that was almost a laugh.
Why, just recently, one of the minor demons, a little rhymer, thought to declare himself a king of hell. It came to nothing. These things never do. They come to our palace and say we have battled, there will be a coalition. I say, very well. And before long they oust each other, and destroy each other, and it matters not. Or they say, Lucifer, you are deposed, you are no longer king of hell, as if merely saying something were enough to make it true. They believe themselves Lucifer's equals, all these pitiful little gnats. I am, more powerful than any of them. I could have destroyed any of them, perhaps all of them, without much effort. So instead I manipulated them, set them one against the other, let them faction and divide and plot. I choreographed the legions of the damned and orchestrated the screaming. In the beginning, I enjoyed it. But I grew weary, mightily weary. I ceased to care.
I understand, Morning Star, the nightmare it can be to rule over nightmares. But it is your responsibility to the mortals.
Ah, yes, the mortals. I ask you, why?
Why what? First among the fallen. Lucifer turned so that he was facing Morpheus. He leaned back, as if riding the air current.
Why do they blame me for all their little failings?
He asked.
They use my name as if I spend my entire day sitting on their shoulders, forcing them to commit acts they would otherwise find repulsive. The devil made me do it. I have never made one of them do anything. Never. And then they die, and they come here, having transgressed against what they believe to be right, and expect us to fulfill their desire for pain and retribution.
Lucifer spotted something then.
Ah, here we are. This holdout cell should be a fine example for you.
He swooped downward, Morpheus following, in the direction of a large stone slab overlooking the starving Jubilee. Bound to the face of the stone slab with old iron chains and nails, was a man, large and powerful looking. Lucifer hovered before him, arms crossed.
Did you not hear my proclamation? You are free.
The man's tortured and stretched flesh moved around the mouth area, and a dry, deep and hollow voice emerged.
I will not leave.
Oh, but you will leave.
Lucifer assured.
You do not understand. I am Brishao.
So?
I am receiving just punishment for the crimes I committed while I was alive,
the man said with great pain and effort.
For my crimes were monstrous things.
I don't care about your crimes,
said Lucifer, impatiently.
I want you out of here.
I am Brishao of Livonia.
The man labored on, heedless of Lucifer.
I took my mother by force, and I strangled my sister when she would not consent to my advances. I ripped out the tongues of those who spoke against me, and cut the unborn babes from the wombs of my enemies' women, that they would not become warriors to rise against me. I bathed in their blood. Soon my name was whispered in the night by mothers to terrify their children into obedience. I am Brishao, and when my mistress was unfaithful, I cut the nose from her face, and wore it about my neck. I had her sewn to her lover, and left them in the desert to be eaten by wild dogs. And I laughed as I heard them scream. I am Brishao, and this is my punishment.
You must go,
reiterated Lucifer.
Did you not hear me, fiend? I have killed.
I heard. You killed a number of people, who by now would be long since dead anyway. So what? You've been chained to this slab for 1100 years. Haven't you tortured yourself enough?
It is not I who tortures me,
insisted Brishao.
It is the vengeance of the Lord. I
am Brishao.
Lucifer completed for him.
Yes, I know.
Morpheus addressed the chained man. No one today remembers Brishao, he intoned. The world has forgotten you.
Demon, I will not be fooled by your prattle.
Brishao spat.
He's right,
said Lucifer.
No one. I doubt one living mortal in 100,000 would be able to point to where Livonia used to be on a map.
This man thrives on the dream of being hell's most evil prisoner, mused Morpheus. I shall take that away from him. Morpheus fixed his gaze upon Brishao, eyes sparkling within their black pools. Brishao's eyes went wide with shock, and after a moment, the chains and the iron nails fell away. Brishao fell forward, not even attempting to stop his fall as his ruined face landed in the dirt. When slowly he rose, his body heaved as he was racked with sobs, tears falling from his eyes and turning to smoke on the hot ground. He seemed more tortured now that he was free, than he was chained and pinned upon the stone.
What have you done to me?
Brishao demanded.
I feel like I am no one.
Because that's what you are,
said Lucifer. He jerked his head.
Enough. Go.
Brishao got to his feet, and stumbled slowly away.
But where do I go?
He asked quietly, bewildered, more to himself than to either of them, for he no longer seemed to pay them any mind.
Where the hell do I go?
He repeated.
Away,
answered Lucifer, determined to have the last word regardless. He returned his attention to Morpheus.
Can you imagine what it was like? 10 billion years spent providing a place for mortals like that to torture themselves. And like all masochists, they called the shots, burn me, freeze me, eat me, hurt me, and we did. They talk of me going around buying souls, like a fishwife come market day, never stopping to ask themselves why. I need no souls. And how can anyone own a soul? No, they belong to themselves. They just hate to have to face up to it. I don't make them come here.
Lucifer gave Morpheus a pointed glance, and Morpheus felt such intense shame that he was forced to look away.
That's right,
said Lucifer, a cold look of judgment in his eyes.
But you did send her here, didn't you? The woman, Queen Nada. She was the one person in hell that was not here because she wanted it, or felt she deserved it. And people call me evil. No wonder you're here in hell. You came here for the same reason anyone else does.
I did not come here for torture, refuted Dream. I came to free her. To apologize to her. Lucifer snickered.
I'm something of an expert in these matters. Apologizing, in person, to a woman you've most horrifically wronged. Sounds like torture to me.
Lucifer alighted upon the ground, outside the main gate of hell. Morpheus, unthinking, landed beside him. The gates closed by themselves, and Lucifer took a key from a belt at his waist. The key was large, and made of corroded metal. Lucifer placed the key inside the lock, and turned.
Morpheus, I swore I would not harm you within the bounds of hell, did I not?
Yes. You did.
Well, we are now outside the bounds of hell.
Lucifer turned to face Morpheus, and in his hand he held a wicked-looking knife.
I've always hated you.
Lucifer continued.
Better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven, that is the line Milton wrote for me to say. But I do not reign here. I never have. For what power would hell have, if those here imprisoned were not able to dream of heaven?
Morpheus steeled himself. He was not accustomed to fighting, but he had arrived prepared for such an eventuality. He took the helmet out from the folds of his robes, where he had been holding it in the crook of his arm, and placed it over his head. Then Lucifer turned the knife around, offering the handle to Morpheus.
You must cut off my wings,
said Lucifer.
It is the last thing that needs doing. Please, do this thing for me.
Morpheus took the knife. Very well, if that is truly what you wish. Lucifer knelt down upon the coarse dust. And Morpheus commenced cutting. Lucifer screamed, as Morpheus sawed at the flesh of his wings, through sinew and muscle and bone. The blood gushed forth, hitting the boulder size of Morpheus' skull helmet. And the scream of Lucifer was long and horrendous, reverberating across the desolate hellscape. When the deed was done, Morpheus cast aside 2 pairs of bloodied, leathery wings. Upon Lucifer's back were 2 gaping and bleeding wounds. Lucifer's breathing was ragged. Lucifer. Morpheus was hopeful that he had earned an answer from Lucifer, in return for this gruesome favor. Where is she?
Out there, somewhere,
said Lucifer, gesturing vaguely.
There are so many of them, all my little disembodied refugees, fluttering away through the dimensions.
Morpheus' jaw set grimly. Lucifer would be no help at all. This was pointless. Lucifer rose to his feet, and turned about to face Morpheus. He extended his hand, which held the large and corroded key.
This is for you, Dream Lord. Take it.
The key to hell?
Exactly. It's yours now. It's all yours, a locked and empty hell. Perhaps it will help you find what you seek.
Lucifer began to fade away.
But somehow I doubt it will.
Morpheus felt cold. And it wasn't just the cold metal of the key in his hand, nor the cold wind blowing through a now empty hell. Something big and terrible was happening. Something in reality. And it required his immediate attention. He feared it might already be too late.
Oh no, I think I know where this is going,
said Matthew the Raven, through dark feathers covering his eyes.
Getting squeamish?
Said Cain.
I thought you liked this sort of thing.
No, it's just. I was there, sort of. I remember what went down.
Explained Matthew. A look passed between all the members of my Dreamtime crew, and their expressions darkened. All of them who had human-like skin blanched, casting their gazes downward. Only my Mother Rose looked confused.
Whatever it is, it must have been before my time,
she said.
So what happened?
Indeed, it was long before your time, Mother, I said. And it occurred far away from Earth. I cleared my throat, for effect. So, once upon a time, in a galaxy far, far away.
Oh jeez.
Griped Mervyn.
Nerd.
I smiled at that, for it was true. There was a giant red sun, and its name was Rao. Orbiting Rao was a small planet, much like Earth. And living upon this Earth-like planet was a race remarkably similar to humans. The planet's name was
Krypton,
said Rose, her eyes widening.
Holy shit.
I nodded. The birthplace of Superman. At this, my assembled listeners perked up significantly.
Now that sounds promising,
said Mervyn.
It does.
Agreed Nuala. Mervyn looked at her in surprise.
Hey, what do you know? We finally agree on something.
Is he as strong and handsome as they say he is?
Asked Nuala of me. He was. Her face fell.
Why the past tense, Dream Lord?
We shall come to that, I promised. But first, Krypton. If there is one thing that all sentient beings have in common, it is desire. And like most of the endless, without their siblings to keep it in check, desire ran amok. You see, Dream's undivided attention was necessary to give desire a tangible and productive form. Desire can be a great thing, a motivating thing, fueling lofty ambitions and hope. In ideal circumstances, hope leads one to delight. But if one cannot be bothered to reminisce about the past, nor imagine the consequences of current actions upon the future, then desire becomes nothing more than a path of impulse and delusion, winding through the realms of despair and delirium. And at the end of that path, destruction waited. Destruction was older than desire, for things decayed and changed form starting from the moment they were created, before they could experience desire. But desire had a habit of leading mortals into destruction's realm nonetheless. Destruction's realm was without its eponymous leader. Things would still be destroyed without his involvement, but he didn't want to be responsible for it any longer. So he abandoned his duties. But destruction had another aspect, the other side of his coin. It was destruction, and his opposite, that kept his younger siblings in their more positive aspects. With destruction absent, hope and delight became despair and delirium, and desire took on a darker, more selfish form. It was not that hope and delight had ceased to exist, but these aspects of the endless were too weak to be personified. Before destruction abandoned his post, and before Dream traversed the nothing realms and walked the wastes of hell, there had been no obvious cause for alarm concerning Krypton. The citizens of Krypton were intelligent, and prided themselves on their scientific achievements. They were the first in that region of space to reach out to another advanced civilization and successfully establish contact. Indeed, the probe the Kryptonians sent to my mother's planet of Earth arrived shortly before the events I have described to you. This probe was made by a prominent Kryptonian scientist named Jor-El. In a world where science and technological understanding were held in such high regard, Jor-El wielded considerable influence. Unlike many of the other Kryptonians, however, he was a person who spent considerable time in the dreaming. And his dreams were not like many of the others, where they dreamed of greatness and glory, and of power. He dreamed of a world at peace, one that he could leave in good conscience, for he also dreamed of exploring other worlds, and of sharing the bounty of Kryptonian knowledge with a younger, more primitive species. He wanted to live there happily, with his wife and newborn son. Jor-El delighted in his first conversation with a being from another planet, a human named Thomas Wayne. This human was a rather average specimen for his kind, being something of a drifter who randomly happened upon the strange probe. But during this chance encounter, Jor-El was able to impart his world's knowledge. Thomas Wayne would become a brilliant scientist and engineer like Jor-El, and do much to improve the living standards of his species. Jor-El was very proud of this achievement, which he attributed not only to his own efforts but to the advanced state of his world's civilization. But what Jor-El failed to understand was that the populace of Krypton was not nearly as enlightened as he had always supposed. His wife, Lara Lorvan, could have told him that, and attempted to do so many times. The Lorvan family, of Kandorian stock, was a militaristic one, and could not have been more different than the academic and intellectually driven House of El. Lara graduated with honors from the most prestigious of military academies, as her ancestors had done for time beyond memory. But in the recent era, the warfare had become less of a martial affair, and more of a political one. At a certain point in Krypton's history, most of its inhabitants had merged into one unified, planet-wide civilization that refused to call themselves anything but Kryptonians, but there was one sizable holdout, and that was the nation of Kandor. The reasons for the grievous strife between Kandor and the other Kryptonians were manifold and complex, but if one could boil the conflict down to its core essence, and not lose the truth of the matter in the pursuit of simplicity, Kandor disputed that the prevailing technological vision for Krypton was the correct one. Kryptonians generally believed in order, and that the best way to achieve order was through technology and science, as well as a certain level of competition between individuals, controlled in such a way that there was minimal disruption to the general homogeneity. They found the Kandorian culture anarchic, a form of regressive barbarism. Their refusal to fall in line with the rest of Kryptonian society, which believed itself to be objectively superior, was baffling and threatening. The Kryptonian majority believed it was of paramount importance to bring the Kandorians into the fold, but the more that they attempted to persuade the Kandorians to give up their sovereignty and join the global order, the harder the Kandorians fought back. And the more hostility they received from the Kandorians, the more fearful the rest of the Kryptonians became. Desire and fear are inextricably linked. For what is fear but the desire to avoid pain and suffering? But there is a fundamental difference. Desire compels you to run toward things that you find appealing, but fear simply tells you to run away, in any possible direction, even into nothingness, or, if it is more expedient, you may simply destroy the source of your fear. Thus fear gives way to destruction. Especially when Dream has momentarily stepped out of the office. Jor-El did not appreciate the importance of the ideological issues between his society and Kandor, nor did he believe his wife when she warned that Kandor and the rest of Krypton could come to blows. But that is exactly why Lara Lorvan wanted to leave Krypton, though she also shared his dream of roughing it on the primitive planet of Earth. This desire for a grand adventure was nothing in comparison to her fear for the safety of her son, Kal-El, should they decide to stay. But Jor-El would not leave until he finished one final project. Jor-El saw that greed was consuming his beloved Krypton. He knew that despite his people's many virtues, greed was the one vice that they could not overcome. Insatiable greed fueled the competitiveness of Kryptonian society, and led to endless factionalization. The planet simply could not accommodate them much longer. And Jor-El worried that without his continued influence guiding global politics, civilization could collapse. Indeed, he worried that even his efforts would not be enough. And so he created an advanced artificial intelligence. The ultimate benevolent ruler, one who could guide the Kryptonians without bias. Its name, when translated into English from Kryptonian, was something along the lines of the brainchild. The Kandorians of course were enraged. They accused Jor-El and the Kryptonians of creating a false, artificial god, to tyrannize over everyone living on the planet. Kandor declared war. They vowed that they would destroy this new god, and any who stood to protect it. The ambitious General Druzod, Chief of Security on the Kryptonian Ruling Council, had long sought to replace Jor-El, both in his position on the council and at the side of the beautiful Lara Lorvan, even though she was Kandorian. Now he saw his chance to attain his desires, and he seized upon it. Jor-El was a well-known pacifist, arguing against military action. He had always maintained that the Kryptonians must focus on the good of all, regardless of whether their troublesome neighbors helped or hindered their efforts. But the fearful Kryptonians no longer desired to hear about Jor-El's lofty plans for the future, if indeed they ever did, for the Kandorians were coming to destroy that future, as well as their current prosperity. And thus, shortly after Jor-El's AI brainchild was born, it was taken away from him. The Kryptonian Ruling Council was not interested in using the AI to fairly distribute resources or preserve the world. They determined that the best and most pertinent use for the AI was as a weapon against their enemies. The AI brainchild agreed with them, not with its creator. The brainchild was sentient, you see, its programming imbued with the desire for self-preservation. The Kandorians had threatened to dismantle it. The AI wanted to live, and it wanted to bring about the vision for which it was designed. Both desires required complete control over the populace. And if the Kandorians would not cooperate, it reasoned, then they needed to be destroyed. The Kryptonians and the brainchild AI turned to General Zod, who promised to rid them of the Kandorian threat, and assisted with his meteoric rise to power. The first part of his war strategy had little to do with Kandor itself, but instead had to do with their own populace. The brainchild surveilled them for any hint of Kandorian sympathy, or disloyalty to the Kryptonian way of life. They watched for any sign of Kandorian infiltration. And access to knowledge, which was once freely available to all without restriction, and indeed provided the basis for all other Kryptonian ideals, was almost entirely revoked. But the common citizens of Krypton hardly noticed, for the brainchild made sure to distract them. For all their intelligence, they were ultimately simple creatures with simple desires. The brainchild knew what each and every one of them wanted, and supplied them in the form of waking dreams. Jor-El watched in horror as everything he cherished devolved into a nightmarish dystopia. Worse, no one seemed capable of imagining anything different. And then, the brainchild AI, which the Kandorians had already taken to calling the Brain Maniac, or more accurately, for it was a Kandorian compound word, Brainiac, created something monstrous. a creature of gigantic proportions, and with nearly infinite destructive capabilities. The creature never tired, could not be killed, and had no known weaknesses. The creature's codename was Doomsday. The Kryptonians meant this name to refer only to the doom of their enemies, but Jor-El knew, from the bottom of his quaking heart, that the creature would be the doom of all Krypton. Jor-El worked in secret to create a portal to a pocket dimension, a shadow of Krypton which Jor-El dubbed the Phantom Zone. Jor-El and his wife planned to lure the creature into the Phantom Zone, and safely imprison it there. Instead, General Zod found out about their plans. He ordered Lara Lorvan and Jor-El arrested for treason. Lara Lorvan became General Zod's prisoner. He offered her freedom in exchange for renouncing her husband and bowing to General Zod's desires. She refused. Jor-El was kept imprisoned in his laboratory, ordered by Zod to maintain the Brainchild AI, and to finish his work on the Phantom Zone technology, for Zod to use as a prison for political dissenters. The Doomsday creature was then employed to wipe out the Kandorians. As Jor-El predicted, the Doomsday creature's appetite for destruction did not end with the removal of the Kandorians. It was made for one purpose only, and the Kryptonians did not know how to put a stop to its rampage. Doomsday began to tunnel into the planet's crust and nourish itself on the planet's core, increasing its already gigantic size and incredible power. Magma spewed from these innumerable planetary wounds, and flooded the surface with fire, ash, smoke and death. Brainiac discovered that Doomsday's siphoning was weakening the planet's core. It was becoming volatile, unstable, fearful of its own safety, and unwilling to give up on its newfound dreams of attaining personhood. Brainiac informed Jor-El that the core would soon collapse, resulting in the planet's destruction. Jor-El found in his workshop laboratory a scaled-down prototype of the spacepod, used for testing. He had planned to create full-sized versions to be placed aboard the spaceship, the one he had once dreamed of using to fly his family to Earth. It was too small to fit an adult, but it was just the right size for his baby son Kal-El. Desire is often selfish, but not always. Not when the desire is rooted in love. Jor-El loved his son, and desired that he should live to see another sunrise, even if this sunrise were not provided by the Red Sunrow. And he dreamed of his son arriving in safety upon the planet Earth, reaching manhood, perhaps even falling in love. And then, maybe, he wouldn't be the last son of Krypton after all. He placed the infant in the spacepod. The hatch closed, and hypersleep was induced in the baby Kal-El. The coordinates of Earth were set. Brainiac downloaded itself into the pod as a stowaway. Launch was initiated. And then the planet exploded. It would take far too long to explain all the ways in which Morpheus intervened in these events. Suffice to say, he was exhausted beyond comprehension. He was too late to save Krypton's populace. He arrived with only enough time to plant certain seeds of inspiration in order to preserve one infant's life. He felt some small triumph in that, at least, but this feeling was vastly overshadowed by his overwhelming sense of failure. Morpheus watched as the souls of the Kryptonians were guided away by his sister Death. He had never seen so many following her at once. Billions of dreamers lost. And it was all his fault. Many of them were taken to heavenly destinations in the dreaming. But the ones who would have been ferried to the Kryptonian wing of hell, followed death to the doorstep of her own sunless realm. Being the kind personification she was, death couldn't bear to close her door on the lost souls and leave them hanging in the void. More than that, they were her responsibility, even if they didn't have anywhere to go. So she let the lost souls inside her abode, and would keep them there until she could decide what to do with them long term. After all, death could not entertain them at her house forever. As he himself stood at death's door, she gave him a look of pleading, one that said, "Help me, brother, please, do something." He should have noticed sooner that Krypton was in trouble. He should have realized what destruction's absence might cause, and what the younger Endless taking on their negative aspects portended. And he should not have spent so much time away from reality. And hell. He needed to figure out what to do about hell. It couldn't remain empty and leaderless forever. Morpheus needed time to think, to assess his options. The Lord of Dreams flew listlessly through nowhere. He would eventually reach his palace at the heart of the dreaming, where he could reflect upon recent events in relative comfort, but he was in no hurry. The cold of nowhere seemed more appropriate, more aligned to his current mood. He wondered if this was because of his own desire for self-punishment. Maybe prolonging his stay in between the worlds was as close as he could come, as an Endless, to inflicting hell upon himself for his transgressions. He was so tired. And that is how Dream of the Endless, one of the most powerful beings in the universe, came to be caught in a mere mortal's trap.